Hey guys, Bart from TST Industries here, and in this video I will be demonstrating the installation of our TST Industries pod signal kit on a 2017 Honda Grom equipped with the TST Industries fender eliminator. We already shot part 1 and 2 of this 3-part series. In part 1 we showed you the installation of just the fender eliminator components. In part 2 we showed you the installation of the low profile signaling kit for the rear of the bike, and now in this video we will be demonstrating the installation of this kit here, our last in the series component. Alright, so this particular kit is available only in a clear lens trim. It does fit both of our rear mounted license plate bracket and our slightly more forward tucked license plate bracket. The installation is really simple. The kit comes with all the hardware necessary for installation. Follow along, let's get started. All right, so in the first step here, we will be extracting the sub harness that is still contained within the fender assembly that you guys saw me take off in part 1 of this series when I was installing the fender eliminator components on the bike. So for this portion, we will need a Phillips screwdriver and perhaps a needle nose plier. That always helps, it's not necessary. And depending on how you're going to be removing this sub harness, we may need a diagonal cutter for wires. I'll show you guys why. All right, so we'll flip this guy over and we will want to take off these fasteners. There are 4 of them. In addition to these 4, we have one more through the top. It's located right here. Now doing that will release this bottom portion of this fender. We can remove this bottom part and then feed the sub harness down through the inside here until we extract this boot. We'll slip off this boot and expose the connections here. Now you'll notice you have a bunch of connections and then a continuous wire going towards the bottom here to the license plate light. Now this connection to the license plate light doesn't actually have any sort of a plug, so as I mentioned, you can just cut it off with enough length to then splice a license plate light of an aftermarket kind into this assembly, or if you're like me, you'll want to probably remove the entire length of the wire and then have as much length preserved as possible. So I'm going to take off this routing tie and make sure all my wires are loose. And then we have bullet connectors here. For the ground we have green, and those 2 green wires from the signals go into a single receiving female. So I'll just disconnect those. This is okay to do by hand, but if they bind, this is where I bring in my needle nose pliers, and that just makes it a lot easier. And that way I don't have to yank on the wires and possibly rip off the wires from the crimps. So I'll do that for both the orange and green and blue. Right now my signals are removed, unplugged, and now I just have this 1 wire left running to the license plate light. So now I will need to get into the license plate light. I'm going to remove these 2 Phillips screws. And doing that gives me access to the inside of the light. I will remove the bulb from this assembly, and then I will use my pliers to push in on that portion that the bulb is hanging out of, and that will dislodge the rest of my sub harness, and the sub harness will come out really easy. Now, I don't know about you guys, I actually don't have any use for these components, so I'm not gonna put them to the side. They're just gone, all right? So let's move on to the next part. Okay, so now we will plug the harness in, the sub harness into the bike's harness. This is the plug that we need to plug this female portion into. So get that under this strap and the fairing. Find a key, lock it in place, and now I like to get the protective boot over this, just like it was from the factory. We'll stretch it out just like that, and then we'll just get it back into the routing clips on the sub tray here that it was originally in, and route it back all the way to the back here so that our crimp connectors are ready to be plugged into whatever else we have to connect, like our signals. Now, this end for the license plate light, for now I'll just leave it loose on the side behind the other side panel. That is a separate installation we will not be addressing in this particular install. So let's skip to the next step. All right, so now we will actually get the signals mounted on the bike along with the license plate. We are going to grab the license plate along with one of the large washers and one of the longer screws, actually the only screws in this entire kit. And we are going to prep the license plate in place for installation. And then we're going to grab one of the 90-degree brackets for mounting the signals and one of the signals. And I'm going to spin off the nut off the signal, and then I will put the wires of the signal through the bracket just like this. Now this will mount behind the license plate just like that. Some guys prefer to have this reversed like this. So that when you mount it behind the license plate, it just goes inboard a little bit more. I'll demonstrate here, this versus approximately this. Choice is yours when you mount it. All right, I'm just going to go with the stock configuration. Get it in this configuration with the bracket. Put the nut onto the wires, flange first, and then spin it on by hand. I'm not going to tighten anything yet. That will come later. All right, so now we have the signal bracket in this configuration. We are going to get another washer from the hardware kit along with a locking nut, and this will go behind this setup in this configuration. This will make contact with your license plate bracket, and then the washer will go behind that, and the nut will spin onto the screw that's protruding from the back there. So I'm going to do that now. Use a 4mm Allen here to get this fastened. And again, at this point, we leave it just snug, but with enough adjustability in the system so that we can make adjustments. Same procedure on the right side of the bike. Washer, screw onto the signal and the bracket. And pay attention to the configuration that we're going for. I'd like to take a little bit of time to get these adjusted into the position that I'm going to leave them at. What you want to do is make sure that this surface is perpendicular to the ground. And then also to have the axis of the signal pod on the same axis as the other side signal pod. That will make sure that they're hanging level and look good. On that note, actually, if you want them to look like this, it's entirely up to you, I guess. Still adjust them that way. For me, I like to have them level. Then I'm slowly going to start tightening down on all the components. Alright, so I think I like the way I've adjusted these. I'm going to use a 4mm Allen on the outside, 10mm box wrench on the inside. And tighten this down until the locking nut lock component engages. Alright, so let's lock this down. And now I'll still leave these a little loose. I'm going to be manipulating the wires. I don't want them to be tight yet. I want to be able to give them freedom to move around. All right, so now let's get these wires into the trunk compartment and get them connected. They will have to go in this location here, right next to the bracket, next to the license plate bracket, just under the gap between your undertail closeout and the subtray. So how do we do that? We could possibly manipulate them through the little notch, but what I like to do is actually loosen this a little bit and give the ability to be able to be manipulated. So what I'm going to do is take this screw and the one on the opposite side of the bike and just loosen them to the limit of where they still stay on the bike, and all these components stay on the bike, but we have some adjustability in the system. We could vary the gap. And I will show you in just one second what I mean. As you can see, with these screws loosened, I'm able to manipulate this entire assembly. So that'll make it easier for me to make enough gap between the closeout and the subtray to pass these wires through. I'm just going to do these one at a time because it seems to be simpler that way. Once they go to the top, we'll get them in through the window that is responsible for passing wires from bottom to the top. See here, holding the wires that I just passed through to the top. So I'm good on the right side of the bike, and now I'm going to repeat those steps on the left side. Alright, so I have all the 4 wires in my trunk compartment here. Now I will need to make sure that all the 4 wires are truly off to the side of my license plate bracket, so that when I tighten down on these screws that we just loosened, we don't run the risk of clamping these behind the bracket and causing them to sever. Also going to make sure that I have even tightness on the wires between the exit point behind the bracket and the pod signal. And if you're going to tie them down with zip ties or some other method, make sure to leave enough slack at this point to do that. Now I'm going to tighten down the entire assembly. All right, and at this point we can jump up to the top and I'll show you how to wire this thing up. Okay, now up top here, these are the wire pairs. And this is the window I was talking about here. This is the window responsible for routing wires from the fender to the inside of the trunk area. So this is where they have to come out of. And since they come from two sides of the bracket, very easy to identify right versus left. Now on the wire pairs, you have yellow for positive and black for negative. On this particular bike, ground is green, so black will go into the green, and then yellow on the right side will go into blue. And before I hang my hat on this, I always like to test it. Power the bike up. I have right signal flashing. So now I'm going to use the left wire pair. Grab the black for negative, push it into the connector on the green double crimp, and then orange to yellow. Now I'm all wired up. Once again, I like to test things every step of the way. My pod signal is operational. So now what I'll do is get this protective boot that comes on the sub harness and slip it over all these connections here. And now I'm just gonna route all of these wires in a way that they stay out of the trunk compartment. As you can see here, maybe, I hope the camera can convey this, there are marks here from rubber standoffs from the seat where they make contact with here, and they also make contact in multiple other places, so you don't want these wires going through anywhere near there, and also away from the latch. This will ensure that you don't get a short circuit somewhere down the line because of the seat wearing through your wires and causing them to connect to each other or short to ground. Use wire ties for this and tie off to other components. I just typically find spaces to tuck things into that will keep the wiring in place. This looks pretty good. All right, get my sub harness tucked into this clip that is connected to the sub tray here, and then jam the blue taillight wire right over it, and that'll keep it in place. And it looks like all the wiring is complete. At this point, we'll jump down to the bottom of the bike and tighten up the signals, finalize everything, and then we'll be done. All right, so let's finish this thing up. I have a 14mm open-ended wrench. The nuts on the back of these signals are open-ended. I previously left them loose, subject to final adjustment here. I'm just going to tighten down on them. The flange of the nut does have a serrated surface, so it locks itself nicely against the back of the bracket. Now I just have to make sure that this surface of the lens is perpendicular to the ground so that it fires out light straight back at the drivers behind you. And then I'm going to finish tightening it. All right. Now the key to tightening these things is not to over tighten them. You have a stud that is threaded that is over molded with this rubber. Tighten down enough on it, you'll rip it out. So the friction that holds this signal in place but leaves it pliable in case you hit something, the friction itself is what holds it motionless. So you just need to have the nut tight enough so that when you try to manipulate it around, it doesn't move, and then move on to the other side. Looks like we're done with this. I like to test the system one more time. At this point, I'll show you guys the operation. Right, left, and back to right. You notice here, we are flashing at the proper flash rate set on the bike, which is 85 cycles per minute. Since we replaced the OEM incandescent lamps with LED signals, typically this would go into a hyper flash where it flashed really fast or get stuck in the on position, on function rather. But we've already replaced the signal relay with our Gen 2 flasher relay meant for function with LED signals. So if you guys are interested in that part, please check out our video. We have that on our website. as well as our channel. And besides that point, I think we are done. I love the results, nice and sleek. Hope you guys do too. I'm going to replace the seat. All right, so this installation is complete. The bike is ready to go. So in this particular location, when your plate is sitting here, we'll first have to determine if this is in fact what you want. Now the reason why I say that is because if you put your signals in this location and you ride a passenger a lot, passenger's legs will likely be very close to this signal often. So that may pose a problem for you. So you may not want to choose this approach. If you do, I'll show you guys how to configure this. Now earlier in the video, we configured the bracket onto the signal in the opposite fashion. The hole was exposed to be mounted onto the license plate bracket, and the slot was where the signal actually fastened in. So we'll have to reconfigure this in the opposite fashion. I'll show you guys how to do that now. I already have the nut off my signal, so now I will just pass the signal wires through the round hole instead of the slot and configure it like this. The slot has to be on the stud side and not on the pod side. We'll pass the nut onto the wires, flange first, and snug it up by hand. This will leave me adjustability, and now I will be able to mount that onto the bike along with the license plate. So the license plate goes on the outer side of the fender eliminator, and this will go on the opposite side. And then it will receive the large washers behind that, and then the locking nut. From the front or from the outer side, we will be using a long screw from the hardware kit along with a washer, just like this. And it all comes together like this. And now I will drop that washer on top of the protruding screw from the back and get my locking nut on there, the locking component towards the washer. Now, the tight fit back there, so I'm going to have to use a tool from the outside. I'm going to use the 4mm Allen. Help me start the threads. Snug this up just a little bit, but still leave adjustability. And here you can see how far these things stick out. All right, we'll do the same thing to the other side. As you can see, I had this part pre-configured to demonstrate to you guys what form it takes, so I won't have to do it in front of you, but it's the same procedure as I just demonstrated. Washer and nut. All right, still have a little bit of adjustability here. And so now you can see what it looks like all together from the side and the rear. And now we will have to wire these things up. So this is a little bit more complicated to route into the trunk compartment than the rear mounted fender eliminator version, just because the spaces are a little bit tighter in there and you have to get it into the right place. So what we will do is just get these in through the outside to the inside, and I'm going to make use of the slots that originally held the OEM fender in there. When you remove the fender, it leaves these little slots, and we'll just get these wires in, and then we can jump to the top of the bike. I'll show you from up top how to get these wires to where they need to go. You know, those pliers can be very helpful in this step. So let's jump up to the top. All right, so let's now take the battery strap off so we could move this battery to the front and get a little bit more access to the inside here before we start routing the wires that we inserted from the bottom to the top. The battery just needs to be moved forward. Now we'll have access to this void here, and we'll be able to snake the wire through there. Now, the tool I like to use is a exhaust spring puller that enables me to get inside a small space and grab a wire and pull it through. What I'm going to do is probably just default to getting it through on the outside of this tube, and then manipulating it towards the inside of the trunk. Alright, I have it here, and now I'm just gonna get it under that tube to make it just a little bit easier. And you just have to be careful not to rip off the crimp connectors. They aren't very fragile, but if you pull hard enough, they will come off. Alright, have the yellow out. Now the black is out. And I have my wire routed to the inside. So before I move to the other side, I'm going to get my sub harness in proper position here. What I like to do is get it fed to the inside so I can make all my connections here in this portion. If I were trying to get it done outside of the trunk compartment, outside of the center, you have legs, standoffs that put pressure on the frame from the seat, and then there's a chance that you will grind through these wires at some point, and that's just not a good day for anyone. So let's go ahead and get this thing wired up in the center and out of the way of any components that could damage it. I actually don't need the license plate light lead in there, seeming as it doesn't like to fit in there. Maybe we'll try just these guys and leave this guy back out in the trunk. Now I need some extra length around here. But now, pretty much good to go here. I can go ahead and connect this, knowing that yellow on the left side goes to orange, and black on the signal connects to the green ground. I'm going to quickly power up the bike and verify that. And it's verified. I'm good to go here. Now I will go ahead and get the other side done. So this side is actually a little bit more finicky because we have less space on this side. So I'm going to remove the fuses from their location here and try to get in there. That spot is awfully small, so it may actually require that we drop the sub tray a little bit, and that step will require the removal of all these screws, or at least loosening them. So let's see what we can do here. All right, so now the right side of the bike, do the same thing with a couple small changes. Get the wire in, and then on this side the situation is much tighter, like I mentioned. I initially thought that taking off or loosening these fasteners here is going to be necessary, but I rethought the situation, and I think I could get us enough access behind this component here, this portion of the subtray, by just prying it away from the frame using a tool. I'm using a needle nose plier that's in there, and now all I have to do is just wiggle around my wires enough so that I can grab them and pull them through the top here. And I see them from this side. Maybe I could influence them to go to the other side of the frame component where I could grab them and pull them up. If this is too cumbersome for you, then I would suggest that you drop these components, and then the subtray will drop slightly and give you more access. And you can always do it that way. I just always like to do things in the least invasive manner. No one can argue that this is not less invasive than the other version, but I already have things bolted up, so I like to keep them there. I know this is possible because I just found one of the wires here. All I have to do is get it up to the top and we'll be good to go. Boom. Yellow is through. And where there's yellow, black will follow. Just gotta make sure not to strain anything. Now it is caught on something down there. I want to make sure I don't pull against whatever's catching it. I only want to pull it up if it's coming up freely. Alright, black is out, and now I just have to get myself enough length to plug these guys in. So at this moment, we are still finding resistance to feeding this thing through. So I'm just going to do a little bit of prying against the bottom of the subtray, and I'm going to push the wire in from the outside to the inside, and that feeds it in for me just like this, and now I have that extra length. I'm going to check if I have enough, and if not, just repeat that same step one more time. And I'm pretty sure I'm good on this now. I have a good amount of length here. I'm going to go ahead and plug it in. On the right side we have yellow going into blue, and then the black is going into the common green ground rather. And our components can remain here. I just need to make sure I'm not routing through this compartment here with a where my fuses go. I'm just going to quickly swap this around to the outside, and once I have it in proper placement here, I'm going to get this out, and there we go. And this configuration looks pretty good. I think I'm happy with it. Just making sure that nothing is snagged, and I can safely tuck all these wires away. Quickly power up the bike, test the right side. Right side's working. I keep hitting the horn. I don't know why. All right. Rookie mistake. I just dislodged this guy here. This is our spare fuse. Back in action there. I'm going to replace the battery Replace the battery strap. Grab a 10mm socket here really quickly and finish that off. We'll be on to our next step. Now that we're all wired up, I'm going to make sure that our signals are level and that their lenses are perpendicular to the ground. And we're going to tighten everything up. Use a 10mm on the back of these bolted connections and a 4mm Allen in the front. And then for the pod signals, we'll have to use 14mm. I might need to flex away a bit on this whole setup. The method I'm going to employ here is to grasp my signal from the back and turn the pod in until I have the tightness that I need. All right, that looks good. Once again, from a previous step, you do not want to over tighten this because you'll run the risk of ripping out the over molded threaded studs that are on the inside of this rubber pod. So we're just looking for enough friction so this thing doesn't move around. Right now it does. So we just need to lock that down. It's pretty cumbersome with the license plate in place and this close to the setup here. But I feel like it's just a little bit easier to gauge where they need to be while they're already installed on the bike. So you can probably tighten them up ahead of time if you'd like, but I'm just gonna continue with my method just because I like them to be level. All right. Yeah, I think I have it pretty good. They look very perpendicular to the ground and level. One remaining step is to replace the seat. All right. So now this installation is complete. We can test the system one more time. We have right, we have left. All right. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please place them below in the comment feed and definitely hit that subscribe button. All right, I'm done. See you guys next time.